I have done it. I managed to finish a book on my TBR list. Oh my god, this is a momentous achievement for me, and I'd like to thank everyone who helped me get here, especially NASA and SpaceX. I watched their live stream of Dragon Crew docking at the International Space Station, and I managed to finish 2/3 of my book because docking takes hours. Oh my god, the 2001 Space Odyssey is not even like close to how slow actual space is. It's crazy. Okay, that has nothing to do with anything. I'm sorry. Let's just get started, shall we? Welcome, I'm Kat, and today I wanted to talk about Steelheart by Brandon Sanderson. Yes, this book was on my June TBR, and I'm done with it. By the way, the second half of the video will contain some spoilers, but I will put up a spoiler warning, so don't worry, I gotcha. Can be fine. So, this is book 1 in a YA dystopian fantasy series. At least I think it's considered a dystopian fantasy, or maybe it's like post-apocalyptic fantasy. I'll just tell you the premise of the book and you'll decide. So, premise of the book is that a mysterious object people named Calamity appeared in the sky and somehow gave a small group of people superpowers, which in this world are called epics. But instead of, fighting crime and taking cats off trees and stuff, epics just decided that since they have superpowers, they can just do whatever they want. They're above the law since the law can't stop them. They can rob a bank or go on a murder spree or take over a city and declare themselves king and ruler, and no one can do anything about it. Let's be honest, that sounds quite plausible. So basically, countries disintegrated and there's just cities and territories controlled by the most powerful epics. And there's no governments. All the law enforcement basically gave up after a few years because, again, how do you police people who can blow up shit with their eyes and fly? Our protagonist David lives in a city controlled by an epic called Steelheart, who is thought to be absolutely invincible. He has a whole bunch of powers. Bullets bounce off him. He can fly. He can just shoot beams of energy or something. He can turn stuff to steel, which is why he's called Steelheart. So everybody's basically terrified of him. But David knows that Steelheart is actually not invincible because as a kid, he saw Steelheart bleed. So he knows that Steelheart must have some sort of a weakness. And David also has a personal grudge against Steelheart because, again, when David was a kid, Steelheart killed his dad. This is like in the prologue, basically. So this is not a spoiler. 10 years later, David is now a teenager and he seeks out this group of people called the Reckoners. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who are basically a group of underground fighters who travel around killing epics. So David wants to convince them to go for Steelheart and try and kill him. So that's our setup. It's pretty interesting. Okay, so let's go one by one. Let's start with the characters. For me personally, the characters were actually one of the weaker parts of the book. When I tried reading this book for the first time years ago, I actually DNF'd it because I found the main character really annoying. It's written in the first person, so you see everything through David's eyes, which did not help at all. And right in the beginning, he meets one of the other characters, Megan, and for half of the book, he wouldn't shut up about how pretty she is. And I get it, he's a teenage boy and all, but still, could you not, at least while you're being chased by literal bad guys? God, just get a grip, David. And because again it's first person and I just did not find his voice as like the writing style, you perceive the writing style in the first person as character's voice, and I just did not find it particularly compelling, especially not in the beginning. He did grow on me as the story progressed. I did end up liking him by the end of the book. The more you learn about him, he kind of grows on you, but still the first half of that book was pretty rough. The other characters were okay, but for me they kind of stopped just on the edge of being really fleshed out. They're all definitely distinct. I never confused them from one another, which did happen to me in other books, but still just something was missing. I was not particularly attached to any of them. In terms of pacing and plot, I thought this book was pretty well paced. I was never bored at any point. There was just enough mystery to interest you and keep you going. There were enough plot twists and interesting revelations throughout the story. So all that, in my opinion, was done very well. But there was one thing that started to annoy me when I noticed it. So this book is written as a page turner, which means that almost every single chapter ends on something dramatic happening, like a dun dun dun. So when you notice that at the end of each chapter, every sentence is phrased in some sort of dramatic way, it just took away from the book for me, because it's like noticing strings on a puppet. You suddenly see the writer behind the words. It just did not feel like a natural part of the book anymore, which was a bit annoying. And also, as I've mentioned before, sometimes tense things or tense situations situations in a story make me want to take a break and put the book down. So this book being built with dramatic or tense thing happening at the end of every chapter basically meant for me I wanted to put the book down every single chapter. So it was a bit of a struggle, but that specifically is my personal weakness. So I don't think that should matter for anyone else reading it, but for me it definitely made it harder to keep going. Also, just in general, I did not particularly like the writing style. In general, I do not notice the writing style in Sanderson's books, which is completely fine because that's not the reason I read them. But here in this book, somehow the writing style felt noticeable. I don't know why. It's like some of the sentences felt phrased in a weird way. And I think that was an attempt to convey the inner workings of David's mind. And because I wasn't connecting to David, it just did not work for me. So yeah, it was kind of Okay, so I've been pretty negative so far. So let's talk about things I actually did like about this book. And as with many of Sanderson's books, it is the world building and the magic system, because he's really good at building interesting settings and inventing different and interesting magic systems. None of the elements in this book, when you just talk about them, they don't seem particularly unique, but when you combine them, that's when the distinction of the book really shines. So the combination of evil superheroes and this post-apocalyptic dystopian world scenario just really works well together. It makes the story interesting. There's just enough mystery and a lot of questions raised that you're really looking forward to being answered, because with Brandon Sanderson you can really rely on these questions actually being answered, because usually he's very specific in what he puts into his books and he does plan things ahead. So I'm definitely curious about knowing more about this world and more about the way the epics powers work, where did epics come from, and I definitely trust that next books in the series will answer those questions. Okay, so there's just one little thing I wanted to talk about that I really did not like, but this is major spoiler. So here is your spoiler warning. Please, 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 if you plan to read Steelheart, skip this next section, because knowing the things I'm gonna talk about will definitely ruin the book for you. Or if you don't care about this book and you never plan on reading it, then fine, keep listening. But don't say I didn't warn you. So there are two characters in this book that actually die and then come back to life. And I hate when stories do that, because even when it's explained, even if it's not like out of nowhere and there's reasons for them to come back to life, and in this story there's a good reason for them to come back to life, they're both epics and they have superpowers, but I just feel like when that happens in a story, it kind of drains a lot of tension out of the narrative, just because character death is supposed to be very intense and impactful thing. It can change the story and the characters in it in a very major way. So when you reverse that, you're basically hitting undo on everything you just did, and doing it twice in a short span of time is even worse in my opinion. So that thing really pissed me off. I was like, you did not just hit undo on the death of these two really major characters. And I wasn't really happy about one of those characters dying in the first place. Megan died somewhere closer to the end of the book. She's one of the two female characters in the book. But then reversing her death felt even worse for me, because you just undermined all that emotion that came from her dying. So did not appreciate. There's no good reason for a character to come back to life, and when it happens more than once, I am just not happy at all. Okay, so some closing thoughts. Even though I've just complained for most of this video, and it did take a lot of effort for me to get into this book, I think overall I did enjoy it. I am looking forward to the next installment, which is Firefight. I will definitely read it. I'm invested in the world. I do kind of like the characters, even though they're not my favorite part of the book. So overall, I think if you like YA fantasy, I would definitely recommend picking it up. It's very readable, it's very well paced, it has interesting ideas, so definitely give this a go. However, if you're looking to get into Brandon Sanderson's books in general, I wouldn't actually start with this book. I think it's one of his weaker books. I think he has much stronger books to start with. And even if you specifically want a YA book, I would actually start with his newer book, which is Skyward, which is also YA. It's also written in first person, but I did think that was much stronger book than Steelheart. However, again, I still enjoyed it. I still think it's overall a good book. I do want to see where the story goes, so this book definitely hooks you in, but it's going somewhere close to the bottom of my personal Sanderson list. So that is it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Feel free to stick around and check out my other videos, and goodbye.